As certified life coaches with 45 years combined experience in human resources, Jen and Katherine have both experienced the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, both personally and professionally. And what they each know to be true is this: our mental, physical, and emotional health are the essential building blocks in order to thrive and shine in the field of HR. So in a first of its kind podcast, we'll be getting real and to discuss and share what has contributed to both our struggles and successes, with the goal of inspiring women around the globe to stand tall and take the necessary action to both thrive and shine in HR. Here are your hosts, Jen and Katherine.
Welcome to Thrive and Shine HR. We are so happy you've joined us. Welcome. Jen, great to see you as always. So fun kicking off the week with you. I love it.
So great to see you, Katherine. I am so excited for today.
I'm so excited why are you excited for today?
What am I excited about for today?
Yeah, why are you excited for today? I want to know.
I get to spend time with you. I get to spend time with the community. I think we were talking right before this. I don't think this is necessarily a topic that's quite as triggering as some of our other topics, which is a good thing. We can kind of like relax right in. So yeah, I'm super excited for this conversation.
I love that. I love that. And just in case our listeners do not know what episode 9 is all about, we're talking about black and white thinking. And the title of the episode is It's Never Black and White: Why Black and White Thinking Earned HR a Bad Reputation. Yeah, so it sounds like it's not so triggering for Jen, which is great, right? We love not being triggered. So Jen, I'm curious, just to go ahead and dive right in. When we talk about black and white thinking or black and white practices in HR, what are some of like the classics that you've heard of or that you've seen that have perhaps resulted in unfair outcomes or litigation or damage to an HR department's reputation? What are just some of the classics?
Oh my gosh. I think, we've talked about this so many times, but I think the role of HR in itself being in kind of this middle role between the company, between the employees. I think we get caught in this a lot. And I think often we're not really even aware. Sometimes we got contracts. I have contract, and a lot of people have policies, handbooks, so much that's written out there in black and white that yet, for so long, so many of us will not question, right? It is what it is, that, that's just the policy. I mean, so many of those.
Yes.
And so, as I started kind of going back through my history around some of the things that I've heard the most of, I think, one of the ones that come up for me the most is really, I think, the tendency for leaders to be very opinionated based on small factors of employees, right? Considering employees as either amazing, exemplary, or problematic. Based on small little factors. I just saw a speech of Simon Sinek's over the weekend where he talked about the shift in leadership from those individuals who are problematic and how much time leaders spend on, the areas that actually do not serve, based on, what actually is helping people grow and evolve. And I think this in and of itself really encapsulates kind of the challenge, I think, for so many of us in HR. It's like, well, wait a second, we've been following these policies and contracts and, handbooks for all this time. How do we step out of that and now be able to look at performance, be able to look at people as truly kind of the technicolor that we really are? And I think that is where I see it much more as an opportunity than it would be, any hindrance, as it's been in the past. So those are kind of my high level. I have, a few stories and things that actually can hit on it even closer, but I want to kind of pick your brain a little bit. What are some of the things that stand out for you? And maybe trigger, maybe not trigger.
Well, I also did not feel super triggered, although classic, I went down memory lane. Of course, after 20 some odd years in HR, right? But something you just said that I hadn't thought of is that 80-20 rule. We oftentimes think, there's so many ways to apply that adage and that statement. And we oftentimes say, I'm spending 80% of the time working on problematic employees, or the micromanagers, or the not so great side of HR, versus the 20% of the time of elevating HR, the 20% of the climbers, the high achievers, the exemplary employees. So you just made me think of another phrase that's used as black and white thinking that may inadvertently be disempowering and not serving us. When we're rooted in that thought of, well, I'm spending 80% of my time on problematic employees, that's actually a really disempowering thought. That's a really disempowering way to look at our work in HR. So again, you just made me think of something that I hadn't even thought of before, but kind of getting back to, some specific examples to drive things home. I definitely have some. I was thinking about how we take policies in the employee handbook. Let's just say in our harassment policy, we have some kind of language about see something, say something. If there's something going on, you must report it. And if our policy says we must investigate it, all right? I have seen organizations go into a full-blown employee investigation when a female coworker alleged that a manager of 30 plus years had sexually harassed her. So the organization went through this whole like huge investigation, when it turns out they hadn't really looked at the employee's past. They hadn't looked at the allegers' intent and the content of it. It was a very, very small, subject to interpretation kind of a comment. And they put this woman on administrative leave. It turns out that she was totally exonerated. This went on for months. It was a small community. The allegations, she felt like really ruined her reputation. So they hired me to come in and do a little coaching with her to hopefully avoid litigation. They were convinced this woman was going to sue them, and they were right. She was ready to sue. She was so upset because she did not sexually harass this woman. And instead of going into that full-blown investigation, they took the policy very literally when they could have done just a smaller type of investigation and not had it blow up into this huge thing where they had to hire a third party person to come in and sort of help avoid that litigation and really help the employee pivot out of the past, things that happened months ago, and how to redirect her brain toward, okay, this did happen. I need to practice my skill of forgiveness. I need to enhance my skill of resiliency. And we got her there. So we avoided the litigation, and this woman's really amazing. So that's just one example. And then I actually had a client last week who was dealing with somebody who showed up intoxicated to work. And here's the other thing with black and white thinking. This HR professional said, this is a safety issue. This person is in a position of safety. They cannot show up to work. But then the director of the department and the overall person in charge of the organization, let's say, believed there were alternative factors that should be taken into consideration, such as the employee's tenure, the employee's past performance, the fact that this exact situation had never happened before with this employee, so on and so forth. So what also tends to happen is when we get really rigid with our rules and we're not allowing for alternative viewpoints, feedback, or suggestions, that also gives HR a bad reputation. We have to be more human. Those are 2 examples that I could think of. Not that I could think of, but that came up for me as I was preparing for the podcast today. I'm curious when I bring those up, what is that stir up in your brain?
Well, first I want to thank you for that, because I think, being able to sometimes check ourselves and check, it's so easy to kind of ground ourselves in what is, and then, just latch onto that. And so just that process of like questioning and asking and being curious and all of that about some of these things
Yes.
that are kind of in place, that's progress. And so I want to pause in those moments and just be able to say, hey, you're doing the work. Right.
Yes.
And so I think that's what I think we want to encourage, both for ourselves and for our audience as well, is like, it's the work. It's like the leaning into
Yes.
what may be appearances, as far as black and white, and what might have been historically, and being able to question that and say, hey, is that really is that really,
Yes.
so my story that I have is actually, really interesting, because as you know, and many of the listeners may not know, I am in an HR role now, and I've been in this role now for almost 10 months. Prior to this role, I actually had an HR role for about 4.5, 5 months that I was fired from. And
Okay, I
that
did not know this.
I know. I
What?
decided to drop a bomb on you. So
Drop
I was
the
hired,
bomb,
not
girl.
what's that?
Drop the bomb, girl. That's what this podcast is all about. I want to hear it.
And this is the second time in my life I was fired. I was fired once in college working in an ice cream store that I was a super slacker and I deserved it. But this time, this
Yes.
was a really fascinating role that I had. So for those who kind of know my journey, I was in HR for 20 years, left the field for about a year and a half to do coaching, and then because of finances and life and all of that, came back into HR. The first HR role that I then took was end of 2022, beginning of 2023, so not that long
Okay.
ago. And it was a role where I basically took a kind of an HR business partner type role. It was a role
Okay.
that was um, somewhat easy for me, just based on, where I'd been in my career
Yes.
previously. It was
Yes.
basically a step into something that wasn't going to be too kind of challenging and overwhelming and that sort of thing. But anyway, so the role itself was one where I was working with about 300 or so employees.
Okay.
And the company, when they went through COVID, they did something different. I think every company out there, in all, with full compassion, every company did the best that they could when COVID happened, right? Like, how do we
Oh yeah.
track this? How do we manage it? How do we administer it? It was just a complete shit show.
Yeah.
And this particular company was no exception. They did something that they at the time felt like was the best at the time. So what they did is they started tracking electronically every type of absence that people were having, along with the details of the absences. And they had a,
Huh. Yeah.
a system that they had created to do that. So basically, it was like, in their mind, it was kind of an insurance policy, I guess, because of everything being so confusing and so
Oh my
crazy, right?
gosh.
So like, we're just going to track everything, right? Da, 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 da. It was massively personal information, massively confidential information, right?
Wow.
So when I started, we had stopped doing that. And so we put an end to that very, very quickly. But there was the historical that was still in the system that they had been doing for over a year, right? And so there ended up being this kind of push and pull between myself and between the senior leaderships that I was working for at that time. And
Mhm.
I had a very strong opinion, which I know some of us can have it sometimes,
Oh, you
but
don't say.
I had a very strong opinion that although, they had, created, all of this, that we needed to, yeah. So anyway, my opinion was basically one direction in terms of maintaining and keeping, the data
Yep.
that had already been corrected. The company had a different perspective of the data. I was somewhat vocal. about my opinion in terms of the confidentiality of the information. And the company felt so strongly that they let me go the following day. And it was one of those things that when it comes to the way that we look at things, right? The way that we can perceive things, we have to, at the end of the day, regardless of what's in writing, what's in black, what's in white, you and everybody out there have to go with your gut and heart. And I will never, ever regret standing up for what I knew was right, standing up for what I knew was, fair and just, regardless of the consequences. And it was, looking back, I'm so grateful for that experience and so
Yeah.
grateful to have been fired, even though it was devastating at the time. I
Yes.
stood for my morals, I stood for my principles, and I stood for the right thing for the people. And that's
Yes.
a really tough thing for people in HR to do, I think sometimes, especially when it feels as though that weight above us is one that could potentially, right, obliterate us, right, when it comes to our
Right.
career and our reputation and our,
Right.
everything about us. And so many of us will then just sit back. We'll cower. We won't actually speak up in the moment where we know that's the right
Absolutely.
thing to do. And so
Yeah.
that was, something that happened that's not that far of a history that,
Right.
I think so many of us can learn from is, yeah, I got fired and I am really grateful I did.
Yeah.
And for those of us out there who have that fear and that tinge around not wanting to speak up and speak our truth because we know
Yes.
something may be wrong because of that fear of being fired, boy, like I think I could speak a whole episode on that, continuing to stay grounded in your truth, regardless of what those circumstances may be. That was a really long story, but I'm glad I
I'm
shared it.
so grateful for this story because I have several clients in my HR 2.0 program, which is specifically for women who are more seasoned in the profession. I hate the term midlife. I'm just going to say it. It makes me cringe. I've got to do some thought work on it. But I have several women who've been in the profession for a while who have been fired. And the reason they hired me is because they can't get out of that negative thought pattern of shame. They're circling in shame. It's impacting their ability to perform in their current job. They're not letting go of the story of this happened to me. I'm a bad person. I don't deserve to be in HR, or the story of I'm never going to be able to get hired again. They're still holding on to anger and resentment about the people who let them go. So, Jen, I got to tell you, I am going to have some of my clients watch episode 9 because we just articulated the difference between disempowered thinking and empowered thinking when it comes to being let go. You learned from it, you're proud of it, and it has absolutely served you. And I have clients who are drowning because of how they have been treated. So thank you so much for just showing us when we can use our brain a little bit differently. That was really unexpected, and I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think, when it comes to something like this, black and white thinking, when we are so accustomed to either see things as good or bad and right or wrong or this
Yes.
or that, I think
Yes.
that was one of the experiences of my life that really allowed me to remain grounded in my truth and know that my intentions were good and what happened, happened. Right? Period. And so, yeah, it is empowering and it's accessible to everyone, and so well, so no, I was just saying, so you had said a little earlier, we were talking about like how that could potentially impact our reputation, right? Like being potentially on the other side of historically what is seen as right and wrong, good, bad, black,
Yep.
white, right?
Yep.
And at what point can I step on that other side and say, I really think we need to talk about this. And that's a scary place to be. It takes courage, it takes bravery. And so, that moment, right? That moment of taking that first step is something that I think for those of us who have really struggled with like that internal battle,
Right.
I just really want to encourage anyone out there that at the end of the day, it actually can be just as simple as taking a step and then another step.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a kind of a powerful, empowering thing that all of us
Yeah.
have right within us.
Yes. And when you say step, what do you mean?
I mean that, everyone has our spidey senses, our gut check senses, right?
Yeah.
When we know something is wrong, it's off, it doesn't feel right, right? Taking that step can look so many different ways. It can be writing an email, it can be speaking up during a meeting, it can be writing that manifesto email, right? It can
Yeah.
be whatever it might be for that internal person, where they might actually be taking a stand that might be
Yes.
a little different than what they might have done in the
Yeah.
past because they didn't want to ruffle feathers. They didn't want to rock boats, right? I get it completely. But at what point do our morals and our internal compass, at what point can that shine through?
I love all of that. And it sounds to me like you really made a definitive decision in terms of you had some sort of thought like, I don't know. I mean, do you remember what the thought was? Like, I am a good person. I stand behind what I said and what I did. Do you have any recollection of what that empowered thought was?
A little bit of that.
Yeah.
I I stand with what I know is fair and just. You know, I stand
I
with
yes,
regardless of what you're saying to me, or I think that is where it can be really tough, especially when here I was not, it's not that I had been there for a long time and I could really be able to, kind of confidently put something out there. I really put something out there more based on my internal,
mhm,
and then
right,
just be able to stay grounded in that and then allow the consequences to be what they were.
yeah.
Yeah. And that
I yeah, and that what?
it can be painful, right? And it
Right.
was painful. But like I said, in retrospect, it'll be in about 3 weeks, it'll be a year. And it's
Wow,
really not been that long a time. And yet it's one of the proudest things I've ever done is to
that's
stand
right.
and was right.
I mean, it's funny because one thing I wanted to make sure we covered today is the topic of when does black and white thinking serve HR? And you just answered it. It's when something's happening in the workplace that goes against our morals and our ethics, which I think for a lot of our listeners, and at least for a lot of my clients, is completely different than a values disalignment. If we value transparency and the organization doesn't, that is a little bit different than a moral and an ethical obligation to ourselves. So I think there's a big difference there. It's not even nuanced. There's a difference between a violation of Title VII or just standing tall for who we know ourselves to be. I don't think it is right to be sharing or making decisions based on this really confidential information, right? That has been compiled, and you stood tall for that. And I love that. And that's an example of when black and white thinking is really, really important, that it really does serve us. I mean, in my opinion, that's it.
Well, and
100% all day
and the
long.
Yeah. And the thing that you said too, I think is really important to mention is sometimes it may not necessarily be that you're on the side of the law or the policy or whatever it might be. It might be that you have to go a little rogue, right? You have to go a little bit rogue because you have to listen to your internal heart, and that's a tough thing to do, I think.
It is
But
a tough thing to
you
do.
know, for any of us who have been in that situation and who can get on the other side of it, boy, is it worth it, right? It's just a matter of like finding that within yourself and then sticking to it. And it can be a truly like empowering thing personally to have that, to be able to say, no, you know what? Like this matters to me. And whatever comes of it, comes of it.
I'm flashing back to when I was sued, the one and only time I was sued. And it was a while back. It was 2007, 2008. And a woman in a remote office, I was based in Colorado, she was in Texas. We had several offices in Texas. And she informed me that she was pregnant. And I did not tell anyone because she asked me not to tell anyone. And we were making layoffs across the country, across the globe, because it was 2007. So if you were in HR in 2007, you too were laying people off. This was the great, what was it? Not the resignation, the Great Recession. Sorry. So many things have happened over our 20 plus years in HR. Anyway, I did not tell anyone in the organization she was pregnant. She asked me not to. And the partners who were making the layoff decisions decided to lay her off with probably about a dozen other people in that same office. She thought that I had told the people of that office that she was pregnant. She made a black and white decision without seeking the facts at all, that I had told her secret, and that's why she was let go. So I got sued, and the organization got sued, and the people in charge of that office got sued. And while certain people higher ups in the organization were very upset that I allowed for the organization to get sued, the two people who were primarily responsible for that office, to this day, we are very close because they know that I am a person of my word. Because they were like, you never told us she was pregnant. And I was like, damn right I didn't. She told me not to. So that's an example of a time where I had to make a decision. Was I going to stand behind my word, right? Or was I going to have a conversation? And I don't know if we would have done things differently. Maybe the lawyer, in hindsight, of course, hindsight's 2020, said that I should have told that employee, well, listen, I actually can't keep that confidential. It would behoove you to start telling people that you're pregnant. And to this day, I still bristle at that advice by the lawyer.
I do too, a little bit.
I do. And, it comes with the territory of HR.
Mm-hmm.
When I am a vault, I have always been a vault. And I just can't, I don't know. It just wouldn't feel right to me sharing that kind of information. So I'll go to my grave knowing that I didn't tell anyone about it, and she can hate me all she wants, right? I mean, who knows? This is like 20 years later. But I know that I kept my word. I kept my promise, and I got sued. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and that happens, right?
That happens.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a possibility that even by doing the right thing and by trying to show up with, a good intention, that perception of that individual there wasn't anything you could do.
Right.
There wasn't anything that you can do. And I think I absolutely rebuke the attorney advice, because that is part of, I think, where we build trust, respect, and the things that we do within HR. There are going to be those times. And so, yeah, I think, from what you're telling me, you did absolutely everything that you possibly could. And unfortunately, it probably would have, it may have gone in that direction regardless.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Those were interesting times for sure. For sure.
I'm sure.
I'm curious. We've talked about this a little bit on the podcast. There are buzzwords, like the word, we don't say hostile work environment anymore. Workplaces are toxic now. You know how that has shifted throughout our HR tenure. I'm just curious if there are some current phrases or buzzwords. Maybe it doesn't even have to be buzzy, but are there certain phrases that you hear in the HR world that are black and white and that don't serve us, that maybe our listeners don't even realize are rooted in black and white thinking?
Gosh, yeah, there's so many. I think whenever we, and again, this is so challenging as HR people because it's part of our role. It's actually in our job description. But when we continuously are, referring, well, it's in the policy, it's in here, it's in there.
Yes.
So often, I think we negate the opportunity to really lean into possibilities when we go have our go-tos, right? Whether it's a policy, whether it's a guideline, whether it's a procedure. And that I get, I think I totally get and understand that can be a very easy, kind of thing to lean on, especially when our email boxes are over 200. And like, there's so many reasons why going to some of those easy things makes sense. And yet I think, in our conversation today and so many other conversations we've had around getting curious, around asking questions, if you've got one employee who's questioning and challenging a policy, it might be time to take a look at it. But at the same time, it might not. I think having that judgment and being as open-minded as we possibly can be. One other that drives me a little bit crazy is things that are around checking it at the door, right?
Let's check it at the door.
Yeah, check it at the door. Right? That's something that's black and white that makes me insane, because we tend to so often want to see these humans who are working for us and with us as being these incomplete bodies that then come and go and plug in. And at the end of the day, that's not who we are. And that's not the reality of being human. So I think more and more, we're really breaking down those and saying, hey, workplaces are not a place where everyone's just bringing up all of their baggage and their issues, right? That's not what I'm saying either. But what we're saying is, I'm a whole human, right? How I show up on this beautiful Monday morning is going to be with everything included, right? The good and the bad. And so when you accept that, and when you allow for that, the potential for so much more, I think, comes when people truly do feel seen as their whole selves. And so for me, that shift around, kind of having this, keeping personal out and checking things at the door, I think we just have to finesse that and find where that happy kind of medium place can be, where people can be themselves and yet we still have a job to do, right? How do we find that balance of being our true authentic selves and yet everyone's still here to serve a purpose? Like, what about you? What kinds of things stick out for you when, you think about the phrases and terms of the past?
I mean, yeah, I think, you know, that same one you first started with, it's policy, it's policy, it's policy.
Mm.
And I think for those of us who have just started a new job, that's a very, very interesting time. It's a very crucial time. And I just remember that the last 9 to 5 role I was in, I implicitly trusted my boss, right? And there was a tenured director who had a 20 plus year employee who he wanted to put her on a PIP. And instead of really exploring the situation, I believed the department director. I just went, yes, of course, right? I was brand new. I didn't do my due diligence. I believed the department director that something was wrong. I believed my boss, you know, he was both of our bosses, and believed both of them. Yep, of course. Yes, we'll get right on this PIP. And turns out there was a long history of discriminatory practice against women. And I did not do my due diligence. So for me, that was just very black and white thinking of, well, of course the department director is correct, right? So I just caution and just remind anybody who's new in your role, you are in HR for a reason. So don't forget, yes, if there is policy and you are new, make sure you're doing your due diligence, because that certainly eroded trust with the women, specifically in that department, for a really long time. They didn't trust me. And I was the first ever HR person. And that was a pretty massive, big misstep. And the other thing that's a little related to that is the black and white thought I hear often. Now, I coach HR women all over the world, right? And what I hear more often than not is language around perfection. It has to be perfect. This email has to be perfect. That is actually black and white thinking. Mm-hmm. And it's rooted in self-doubt. It surfaces as imposter syndrome. And I just caution every single listener that may be a little bit of a sneak, right? It may be a little bit of a surprise. Oh my God, I've never thought about that as black and white thinking. And when we are staying late, when we're working on an email because we're trying to get it so perfect, when we're working on that presentation, we're trying to get it so perfect, when we're not allowing ourselves to take a full weekend off because we're rolling out a new policy, we've got this deadline and it has to be perfect, we're driving ourselves crazy. We're showing our team members that work is much more important than our personal lives. And we're not allowing for imperfection. We're not allowing for learning opportunities. We're not cutting ourselves slack. And this can really perpetuate into, not to be alarmist about this, but it can. I mean, long-term, ongoing, unchecked stress truly does lead to health complications. And I just don't want that for anyone on this call. So just notice, I encourage listeners to notice when your thoughts are black and white and they're not serving you, and there may be a little bit of a sneak. Another one I hear oftentimes from my clients is micromanagers are the worst. And when we choose those thoughts, this micromanager is the worst, or this micromanager doesn't see how he's showing up in the organization. When we're sitting in judgment of people, Jen, you nailed it so early on in this podcast. Curiosity is the antidote. Because when we're sitting in judgment and we're showing that to the employee who's come to us, who's also sitting in judgment of that micromanager, just notice if you're sitting in the pool with the employee, if you're sitting in judgment. And that's not our role in HR, to pass judgment. Conversely, our role is to be curious 100% of the time. It's a little bit of a sneak, and I don't think we think about those thoughts as black and white, and really being of disservice to ourselves and our organization. I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think any time that we are in a position or taking a position where perhaps we're not really open to alternative or open to the possibility of a different perspective, I think that
Yep.
can be risky, right? And so
Yes.
how can we kind of do those gut checks to make sure that we are being as open-minded as possible? And for those of us who have been in the role for a minute, it can be challenging, right? We get
Yeah.
into habits, we get into patterns that can be tricky to catch. You had mentioned the trusting of a leader kind of blindly,
Yes.
I think
Yes.
so many of us have struggled with that, right? Especially
Yes.
when we might be new to a role. We are so trying to kind of make a good impression, to climb up the ladder, to all of these things. And then we're put in a position, and I had one that was similar to that, where I had a
Oh, I bet.
leader who was very confident that they had a poor performer and wanted to do a final warning. And so we went through all of this. And at the time, this was somewhat early in my career. And I was the same as you. I didn't ask the questions that in retrospect, I have all the questions now. But it's like, that was what, 15 years ago. And at the
Right.
time, all I wanted to do was really be able to make sure that I am of service, to the leader and all of that. And so it really blinded me to the truth of it. And so several months later, what ended up coming out was a personal vendetta that had to do with, something that had happened years ago.
Oh
And
boy.
at the end of the day, I I felt responsible, right? And I
Yes.
think that that's something that we do too. We'll then kind of put
Yes.
this on up. I should have known, blah, blah, blah. And here I am 15 months later. I should have known, right? I should have asked the questions. I should have been more diligent. I should have been more curious. And I can look back on that from what it's taught me, from what I've learned, from how I've grown, and say that was exactly what I was supposed to do at that time. That's, I
Yes.
think, the key for every
Yes.
one of us, is to be able to kind of bring up some of these. I mean, me getting fired from a job, that's not exactly the most power move thing to share in a podcast. But it is, I think, where we learn our greatest gifts, right? Is when we do make a misstep in some way and say, wow, you know what? I was really not open. I wasn't very open. I just allowed something to happen, and I didn't ask the questions that in my gut I know should have been asked. And that's okay,
And
right?
that's
That's
okay.
okay. So
Yes.
that's what I want to give us permission for today. It's like, at the end of this episode, can we just all be okay when it comes to
Yes.
recognizing that we have been stuck in black and white thinking, for me, for years and years? And
Yes.
here I am, right here today, wanting to ask the questions so then I can try to continue to get a little bit more in Technicolor. And I
Love
think it's
that.
really that gap that really makes most of us uncomfortable. And we end up not venturing down it because it requires us to kind of pull out icky parts. And those icky parts are what I think, I mean, especially after I was listening to your story, I'm like, wow, what a beautiful thing to have happen to you, what happened to you.
Yeah.
Because now on the other side of it, you're so clear. It brings
So clear.
clarity, it brings awareness. And ironically, I don't know about you, Catherine, but for me, it brings a sense of peace to really be able to look
1000%. Yeah. To really what?
back and be able to kind of almost embrace myself, embrace that younger version of myself, and be able to say that it's okay. It's absolutely okay.
Right. Yeah. When I'm, my clients are in it. My clients who come to me, they are feeling stuck. They do not know how to move forward, whether they're early on in their career, they're lacking that confidence that does tend to come with experience.
Mhm.
So they just, hire me because they want they want to develop their skill of confidence, essentially. So it's not me telling them what to do. I coach them in a way so that they are developing their confidence. And then conversely, my other clients are, sort of a little bit more experienced in HR, right? But they've hit some kind of a roadblock where they're spiraling. Maybe they want out of HR. Maybe they are just done. And that, by the way, is black and white thinking too.
Mhm.
So I just, every single time I'm working with a new client, I mean, one of the questions I always ask is, did you do your best with the information you had at the time? And the answer is always yes. So I just encourage our listeners that with the information you have right now, if you are in a little bit of a yucky or sticky situation or something that you're not, are you doing the best that you can with the information you have? Because, Jen, we're talking about a lot of hindsight because we are so far along in our career. We have done the thought work, both gone to coaching school, which I think gives you so many invaluable skills to do the inner thought work. And it's not therapy, it's not fixing the past, it's just choosing thoughts now that are useful and healthy about the past, right? So you and I have those skills, and not all of our listeners do. And I think, that the quick antidote, so to speak, is that just remembering we're human and remembering to be curious with ourselves and to notice when we're being judgmental of ourselves. And beating ourselves up is not serving us, right? And if anyone listening to this podcast is looking back or sort of sitting in judgment, beating yourself up because you're reflecting back on situations in the past, here's the best news ever. Like, you're catching it now. You're looking at it through a different lens now. And that's the most empowering, useful shift, to start choosing more useful thoughts when thinking about situations that, we're still beating ourselves up for, or we're in the middle of beating ourselves up for. Don't beat yourself up. There are different thoughts to choose. There are more useful, healthy thoughts to choose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And I think, it's just so normal for us to want to, kind of beat on, what may or may not have happened in the past. And I think one of the things that you and I have learned so strongly and want to make sure that we kind of repeat in terms of like our message to our listeners is around that ability to change at any time, right? That ability to pivot based on our new awareness and understanding of how it is we want to be able to show up, right? How it is we want to be able to be intentional. And that, for so many, I think, I just wrote down, we were talking about phrases and things that we've heard. And I think from the ability to change, right, internally, the one that I hear the most is it's too late. Right. I'm too late.
Yes.
It's too late. It's already passed. Things like that, I think, can really be something that many of us will convince ourselves of based on believing that it's going to be too much work or too difficult to be able to make any change at this point in our lives. And, I just really think, you and I are just such great examples of women in our late 40s who have done it, right? Who have done some work, right? It's not necessarily floating down a river. It's going to be some work, but it is so worth it when it comes to being able to reframe everything in a way that can be more empowering and enlightening. And so I think, and just in terms of, kind of that black and white thinking that I know that I struggled with only a few years ago is, it's too late. I'm too old now. It's beyond my prime. And it's such bullshit.
It's such bullshit. It's such bullshit. I know. I feel the same way. Just 3 years ago, my thoughts of, I can't leave this job. I'm so far in the profession. I'm making way too much money to start a whole new career, right? And I wasn't even making that much money. Ski towns are notorious for underpaying employees, right? And that includes HR. And I literally saw those thoughts for what they were. They were black and white. They were disempowering. And I was like, at the time, I'm mid 40s. I've only just started. I just have so much energy because I feel like I've only just started. I truly feel that way. And for any woman who is in her 40s or 50s, I have so many clients, Jen, who are our age, and I get them out of that I'm at the end. It's way too late for me. And that's just indicative that, women don't experience midlife crisis. We experience midlife chaos. And it's been studied, and it's because we have a tendency to ruminate, which is very different than how men experience a midlife crisis. And most of my clients are women. It's just fascinating to me. So no wonder we're choosing these thoughts that it's too late, because we tend to stay in our head and we ruminate, and we can either go down these horrible spirals or we can spiral up. And you and I have done the work so that we're spiraling up. And I know you help your clients and your employees spiral up, and I'm doing the same. And it's the coolest thing ever. And I did not know, I didn't really have any examples of women in their 40s doing what I'm doing. I don't know many other women who have taken this step and really developed their skills of courage and confidence in midlife. Again, hate that term. But yeah, it's possible. And I don't know. I'd much rather feel this happy, this energized, this excited about the future than how I felt in my 30s. I'm not going to lie. My 30s were an ugly time. Truly.
Yeah. And it really just comes down to being open, opening up to what we think we know, what we think is, what we think, like a lot of those things. And so it's really not as hard as anybody makes it out to be. It kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's taking that first step.
Yes. I love that.
Having your program is so amazing for that, because literally people, all they need to do is kind of come in, whenever it best serves it. Yeah, I think having things like your program is so amazing for women out there, because the ability to kind of come in and really get those kind of tools to be able to see themselves in a different way is just so empowering and so powerful.
Yeah, totally. That's exactly right. And so many of my clients, when I meet them, they are just rooted in that black and white thought of, I can't, I don't know how. And just the tiniest little hack, little thought upgrade to take the step that you're talking about is add the word unless. I can't unless. I don't know how unless. So for me, the work I do with my clients is all on thought work, because for me, it's the thoughts we need to upgrade so that we can step into empowered action. We can take that first step. And it's so easy. It's so simple. And once it's applied, that practice is instrumental. You can think it all day long. You can think, I can't unless, and then just sit there and look at those words. You actually have to finish the sentence. You've got to make that thought upgrade. And then you can.
And I'll take it one step further. It's one thing to say it, and then it's a whole nother level when we do it.
Whole nother level.
And that's exactly the thing. Right. When I was doing coaching, I would almost pull my hair out, because I loved my clients and I loved the women I work with, but so many of them would just be completely paralyzed in just the talking about it. And so, it can be so challenging, but yet at the same time, that's where the magic happens, is actually to be able to put those thoughts down and say, this is possible. I am possible. And I'm going to take that first step.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah. And just that's the fun part of coaching for me, because it's no two women are the same. And then figuring out what that roadmap is, but it's never linear. It's never like you go from A to B. I mean, it's always circuitous, and it's never the same for every woman. And it's almost like they're in the driver's seat and I'm in the passenger seat. And when we come to a stop and my client doesn't know what to do, we work through the thoughts to then take that next empowered action step. And it's just the coolest thing ever, because they're never alone. I'm literally like right beside them in the driver, right next to them. I'm like their co-pilot, but they're the one doing the work. They're the one in control, and I'm just there to support and get their thoughts back on track, get their actions back on track. It's just, I'm such a geek. I have so much fun with it. It's so fun.
That's the best kind of coach, though. That's
best.
how I know how instrumental you are in the growth of these women that you work with, because you do it that right way. So so amazing. Thank you so much for all that you do.
Well, likewise. I mean, I say this all the time. And I said this to a woman, and I know we have to go, because I know you have to go to work and I have to go outside and shovel and then come back and get my work done. We have so much snow, it's unreal. But there was a woman on Facebook I was messaging who's a member of your amazing Facebook group. And she said, thank you so much for all you and Jen are doing. Your podcast is really, really inspiring. You're really real. It's the only podcast where I really see people being real about HR. And it was such a compliment. But here's the thing, Jen. You are the type of person I need to surround myself with. I found you, and I'm not letting you go, because I believe that you and I are both so focused on the future. And we allow this grace with our past. We have learned from our past, and we both adopted this growth mindset. And if I don't have you in my life, I'm not going to keep leveling up. And it just proves that point that, there's so many ways to say it, but you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And spending time with you is critical in my life. So I'm just so happy I found you. I'm so happy we connected the way we did. And you make me a better human. You make me a better coach. You make me a better consultant. So thank you. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. It's just, you are next level. And I love, love, love how much you inspire me. So thank you.
I love you.
Love you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm equally inspired by you, and I think we have really started something in terms of not only the podcast and the group, but I think these are the conversations. The more you and I have them, the stronger we feel. Can you only imagine how much stronger those women out there who are listening are going to be once they start having those conversations?
Yes.
Yes. Rather than just hearing it, but then actually applying it. Ooh,
next level.
Next level. So
totally.
I am here for every bit of that.
Every bit of it. Yeah. It's almost like we're forming our tribe of women in HR who have a growth mindset. And even if you don't have a growth mindset, if you have a fixed mindset, but you see what a growth mindset can do, there's an opportunity to up level. There's an opportunity to advance all the time. And it's just such a pleasure for us to be growing our listenership. And by the way, if you are listening and you got a lot out of today's podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. We want to get this podcast out to women all over the globe, HR professionals all over the globe, because we really do believe that every day is a great day to thrive and shine in HR, 100%. So different every day. Give yourself grace for the days that you've only got 20%, but we truly do believe that. So Jen, with that, I think we're out of time. I'm watching the clock tick and I'm like, oh my gosh, how did we go through an hour already? So Jen, for everything.
So with that, I'm going to put our outro music in and wish everyone an amazing Monday. Thank you so much for joining, everybody.
See you next week.